This is not a drill. This is not clickbait. And this is not something you can ignore if you care about the future of professional wrestling. Jon Moxley, the face of AEW, the man who carried that company through its darkest days, the wrestler who gave up his WWE main event spot to help build Tony Khan's vision from the ground up, has been fired from All Elite Wrestling, and I am absolutely shaking with rage right now because this isn't just a shocking roster move. This is the complete collapse of everything AEW claimed to stand for. This is Tony Khan proving that when push comes to shove, when egos clash and money gets tight and TV executives start making demands, AEW is no different from the WWE machine they claim to be an alternative to. But here's what's going to make you absolutely lose your mind: Jon Moxley wasn't fired because of poor performance, or backstage issues, or contract disputes. He was fired because he refused to apologize for telling the truth about what's broken in AEW, and when I reveal what Moxley actually said in that closed-door meeting with Tony Khan that led to this nuclear option, what Warner Bros. Discovery demanded happened to Moxley as a condition for renewing AEW's TV deal, and which AEW EVPs celebrated backstage when they heard Moxley was gone, you're going to understand that AEW just committed suicide and doesn't even realize it yet. Let me break down this absolute catastrophe step by step so you understand the full magnitude of what just happened. According to multiple sources, and I'm talking people who were literally in the building when this went down, Jon Moxley was called into Tony Khan's office approximately 6 hours before Wednesday's Dynamite was set to air. Moxley thought it was a routine creative meeting about his upcoming programs and storylines. He walks in, and instead of talking about booking, Tony Khan looks him dead in the eye and says this isn't working anymore. We're going in a different direction. Your contract is terminated effective immediately. Moxley was stunned. He asked what prompted this, what he did wrong, what changed. And Tony's response, according to people who heard about the conversation immediately afterward, was essentially, you've become a liability to the company's relationships with our broadcast partners and sponsors. Your public comments have made it impossible for me to defend you anymore. Moxley asked if this was about his recent interview where he criticized AEW's creative direction and bloated roster. Tony didn't confirm or deny, but the implication was crystal clear. Moxley pushed back, arguing that everything he said was true and was coming from a place of wanting AEW to be better. Tony said it didn't matter, the decision was final, and security would escort Moxley out of the building. Jon Moxley, the first AEW World Champion, the man who main event their first show, the wrestler who worked through injuries and exhaustion to keep AEW relevant when other stars were hurt or unavailable, was walked out of Daly's place like a criminal being removed from the premises. His locker was cleaned out. His merchandise was pulled from the AEW shop website within 2 hours. And Tony Khan issued a brief statement saying AEW and Jon Moxley have mutually agreed to part ways, the most corporate, WWE-style non-explanation possible from a company that claimed it would always be transparent with its fans. Here's my first question, and I need immediate gut reactions: did Tony Khan make the right call firing Jon Moxley, or did he just kill AEW's credibility as an alternative to WWE? No fence-sitting, choose a side in the comments now. Let's start with the most obvious problem: Jon Moxley is AEW. Not metaphorically. Not symbolically. Literally. When AEW was just an idea, when it was just some billionaire's kid wants to start a wrestling company, Jon Moxley was the first major name to sign. He gave AEW credibility. His debut at Double or Nothing 2019 was the moment everyone realized, holy shit, this might actually work. Without Moxley's star power and legitimacy, AEW is just another indie promotion with a wealthy backer. With Moxley, AEW was a legitimate alternative to WWE that could attract top talent. Moxley was AEW's world champion during the pandemic when they had to run shows from Daly's place with no crowds. He worked his ass off making those shows feel important when many wrestlers would have just phoned it in. He main event PPVs. He elevated younger talent by working programs with them. He gave AEW their most critically acclaimed matches. He was reliable, you could always count on Mox to deliver, to show up, to work hurt, to do whatever the company needed. He was the backbone of AEW for 5 years. And Tony Khan just threw him away. Fired him. Discarded him like he's some developmental talent who didn't work out rather than the foundation of the entire company. Do you understand how insane that is? That's like WWE firing Steve Austin in 1998 because he criticized Vince McMahon's booking. That's like WCW firing Sting because he spoke honestly about the company's problems. You don't fire your ace, your franchise player, your most reliable main eventer unless something catastrophically bad happened. And according to every source I've talked to, nothing happened except Moxley telling uncomfortable truths that Tony Khan didn't want to hear. Question for the AEW loyalists: can AEW survive without Jon Moxley, or did Tony Khan just fire the one person holding the company together? Be honest about AEW's prospects now. Now let's talk about what Moxley actually said that apparently got him fired, because this is crucial for understanding whether this was justified or an ego-driven disaster. In a recent interview, I believe it was with a wrestling podcast about 2 weeks ago, Moxley was asked about AEW's current creative direction. Instead of giving the usual corporate speak politician answer, Moxley was honest. He said that AEW has lost its way, that the roster is too bloated with wrestlers who don't get used, that storylines get started and abandoned without payoff, that there's too much focus on dream matches and not enough focus on storytelling and character development. Everything Moxley said was true. Every single AEW fan who's being honest with themselves knows these criticisms are valid. The roster is bloated. There are incredibly talented wrestlers sitting at home not being used because AEW keeps signing more people. Storylines do get dropped. We've all experienced the frustration of investing in something only for it to disappear without resolution. AEW has prioritized work rate over storytelling in many cases, leading to great matches that don't mean anything because there's no emotional investment. But Moxley didn't just criticize, he also offered solutions. He talked about how AEW needs stronger creative leadership, how Tony Khan needs to either delegate more or bring in experienced bookers who can structure shows better, how the company needs to focus on building long-term stories with their core roster rather than constantly bringing in new people for one-off appearances. Moxley was trying to help AEW by being honest about its problems, the way a team captain would try to help his team improve by addressing weaknesses. And Tony Khan's response was to fire him for it. Think about that. Tony didn't say you're right, let's work together to fix these issues. He didn't say, I appreciate the feedback even if I don't agree with all of it. He fired one of his top stars for the crime of caring enough to speak honestly instead of just collecting a paycheck and keeping his mouth shut. That's WWE level shut up and wrestle corporate mentality from the company that claimed it would be different, that claimed it would listen to its wrestlers, that claimed it valued honest communication. Free speech question: should wrestlers be allowed to publicly criticize their company's creative direction, or should they be required to handle all criticism privately? Where's the line between constructive criticism and being a liability? Now let me tell you what really happened behind the scenes, because there's a whole other layer to this story that makes it even more infuriating. Jon Moxley's firing wasn't entirely Tony Khan's decision. According to sources with knowledge of AEW's TV negotiations, Warner Bros. Discovery, the company that owns TNT and TBS where AEW airs, has been increasingly frustrated with AEW's inability to grow its audience. Ratings have been stagnant or declining for months. The viewership numbers aren't where WBD expected them to be when they signed the original TV deal. WBD executives have been meeting with Tony Khan regularly to discuss AEW's content and how to make it more appealing to casual viewers. And one of the issues that kept coming up was perception problems, the feeling that AEW looks chaotic and poorly organized compared to WWE's more polished production. When Jon Moxley did that interview criticizing AEW's creative direction, WBD executives apparently went ballistic. From their perspective, one of AEW's top stars was publicly confirming all their concerns about the company's organizational problems. WBD reportedly told Tony Khan that Moxley's comments were damaging to the brand and that there needed to be consequences to show that AEW takes its TV partnership seriously. They didn't explicitly say fire Moxley, but the implication was clear: either handle this situation decisively or we're going to have serious concerns about renewing your TV deal when it expires. Tony was put in an impossible position: defend his top star and risk the TV deal, or sacrifice Moxley to appease the network. And Tony chose the TV deal. Here's the part that makes me furious: Tony Khan didn't have the courage to be honest about this. He didn't say, look, the network is demanding this and I have no choice. He framed it as his decision, as if Moxley had crossed some line that made him unacceptable to keep employed. Tony threw Moxley under the bus and made him look like the bad guy rather than being honest that he was capitulating to corporate pressure. That's cowardice. That's the behavior of someone who cares more about covering his own ass than standing by the people who built his company. Corporate pressure question: if TV executives demanded Tony Khan fire Jon Moxley, should Tony have stood by his star and risked the TV deal, or was sacrificing Moxley the right business decision? What would you have done? Let's talk about the reaction from other AEW wrestlers, because this is revealing about the internal culture of the company. According to multiple sources, the locker room is split. About half the roster is absolutely devastated. These are the wrestlers who respect Moxley, who learned from him, who appreciated that he was willing to speak truth to power about AEW's problems. They see this firing as a betrayal of AEW's founding principles and a sign that Tony Khan is becoming exactly the kind of authoritarian boss that WWE has. But the other half of the locker room, and this is the part that's going to make you sick, actually celebrated Moxley's departure. These are wrestlers who felt threatened by Moxley's status and influence, who didn't like that he had Tony's ear and could advocate for changes they didn't want. And most tellingly, some of the EVPs, the Young Bucks and presumably others in AEW's executive structure, were reportedly pleased that Moxley is gone. They saw him as an obstacle to the direction they want to take AEW, which is more focused on their style of wrestling and their vision for the company. Think about that for a second. The people running AEW were happy to see Jon Moxley fired. The man who gave AEW credibility, who carried the company through tough times, who was the most consistently reliable main eventer, the leadership was glad to be rid of him. That tells you everything you need to know about AEW's internal dysfunction. This isn't a healthy company culture where everyone is pulling in the same direction. This is a fractured locker room with competing visions and personal animosities, and Tony Khan just sided with the EVPs over his franchise player. Locker room dynamics question: if you were an AEW wrestler, would you be more loyal to Jon Moxley, who tells uncomfortable truths, or to the Young Bucks and EVP structure who have more institutional power? Who do you align with? Now let's discuss what this means for AEW's future, because the implications are absolutely devastating. Jon Moxley was the bridge between AEW and WWE. He had credibility in both companies. He represented the possibility that you could leave WWE and thrive elsewhere. His success in AEW was proof that WWE wasn't the only place a top star could work. By firing Moxley, AEW has sent a message to every wrestler in WWE who might be considering jumping to AEW: don't bother. If we'll fire Jon Moxley for speaking honestly, we'll fire anyone. Your job security is no better here than it is in WWE. And think about the wrestlers currently under AEW contract who might have been considering re-signing or staying long-term. They just watched the company fire its most important star for criticizing creative direction. What does that tell them about their own security? What does it tell them about whether their voices will be heard if they have concerns? It tells them that AEW is no longer the wrestler-friendly alternative it claimed to be. It's just another corporate wrestling company that will discard you the moment you become inconvenient. AEW's entire brand was built on being different from WWE. Better treatment of wrestlers, more creative freedom, a collaborative environment where talent has input. And Tony Khan just destroyed that brand by firing Jon Moxley for exercising the exact kind of honest communication that AEW claimed to value. Every wrestler paying attention to this situation is going to think twice before signing with or staying in AEW, because the company just proved it's no different from WWE when it comes to protecting corporate interests over individual wrestlers. Brand identity question: can AEW still claim to be a wrestler-friendly alternative to WWE after firing Jon Moxley for speaking honestly? Has the company's core identity been irreparably damaged? Let's talk about the timing of this, because it matters enormously. AEW is currently in the process of negotiating a new TV deal. Ratings have been struggling. Warner Bros. Discovery is reportedly offering significantly less money than AEW hoped for because the viewership numbers don't justify a huge rights fee increase. Tony Khan needs this TV deal to work out or AEW's financial model collapses. The company loses money on operations and relies on TV rights fees to stay viable. So Tony is in a desperate position to keep WBD happy and secure the TV deal. And when WBD expresses concern about Jon Moxley's public comments making AEW look disorganized, Tony panics and fires Moxley to show he's taking their concerns seriously. It's a desperation move from a position of weakness. If AEW's TV situation was secure, if ratings were strong and WBD was thrilled with the product, Tony would have never fired Moxley. He might have disciplined him, might have had a conversation about being more careful with public comments, but he wouldn't have severed ties with his franchise player. The fact that Tony did fire Moxley tells you everything you need to know about AEW's current business situation. They're desperate. They're weak. They're so concerned about losing their TV deal that they're willing to sacrifice their most important star to appease network executives. That's not the behavior of a confident, successful company. That's the behavior of a company circling the drain and making panicked decisions to try to stop the bleeding. And here's what makes it even worse: firing Moxley probably hurt AEW's TV negotiations rather than help them. Because now Warner Bros. Discovery is looking at AEW and seeing a company in total chaos that just fired its biggest star, a company with no clear direction or leadership, a company that's imploding in real time. That doesn't make WBD more likely to offer a big rights fee deal. That makes them more concerned about investing in a sinking ship. Business strategy question: from a pure business standpoint, was firing Jon Moxley a smart move that helps AEW's TV negotiations, or a panic mistake that makes the company look unstable? What do you think WBD is thinking right now? Now let's address what Jon Moxley's options are moving forward, because this is where it gets really interesting. Moxley is now a free agent, the biggest free agent in wrestling since Jon Moxley left WWE in 2019. Every wrestling company in the world would want him. WWE would absolutely take him back, probably offer him a massive deal and position him in the main event immediately. New Japan would love to have him back. Hell, even smaller companies like TNA or independent promotions would pay whatever they could afford just to have Moxley's name on their marquee. But here's what I think happens, and this is just speculation, but it's based on knowing Moxley's character and history. I don't think he goes to WWE. Despite WWE probably offering the most money, Moxley left WWE specifically because he was miserable there, because he hated the creative control and micromanagement and corporate bullshit. Going back would feel like admitting defeat, like proving that WWE was right all along, that there's no other real option. Moxley has too much pride for that. I think Moxley either goes to New Japan full-time, where he's always had incredible matches and been treated with respect, or, and this is the most interesting option, he starts working for smaller American companies and helps build an actual alternative to both WWE and AEW. Imagine Moxley becoming the face of something like GCW, or working with independent promotions to create a network of companies that share talent and work together. Moxley could be the catalyst for a real independent wrestling scene that's not dependent on billionaire funding or corporate TV deals. That would be the ultimate middle finger to both WWE and AEW, Moxley proving that you don't need their infrastructure or their money to be successful and influential in professional wrestling. And honestly, that might be better for wrestling as a whole than Moxley just signing with another major company. Career trajectory question: where do you think Jon Moxley should go next? WWE for the money? New Japan for the work? Build something new? What's the best move for his career and for wrestling? Let's talk about Tony Khan specifically, because his behavior in this situation reveals so much about his failings as a leader. Tony came into wrestling as a fan, as someone who claimed to love the business and understand what makes it special. He had virtually unlimited financial resources and an opportunity to build something truly different and special. And for the first year or two of AEW's existence, it looked like he might actually pull it off. But increasingly, Tony has shown that he's not actually equipped to run a wrestling company. He can't say no to wrestlers he likes, leading to a bloated roster full of people who don't get used. He can't build coherent long-term storylines, instead booking shows week to week based on whatever he thinks is cool at the moment. He can't handle criticism, he blocks people on Twitter who question his decisions, he surrounds himself with yes-men who tell him everything is great, and apparently he fires his top star for daring to speak honestly about the company's problems. This Jon Moxley situation is Tony Khan's defining failure as AEW's leader. A competent leader would have heard Moxley's criticisms, recognized they were valid, and worked with Moxley to address the issues. A competent leader would have stood by his franchise player when network executives complained instead of immediately capitulating. A competent leader would have used this as an opportunity to improve rather than as an excuse to eliminate someone who made him uncomfortable. Instead, Tony panicked, made a rash decision driven by ego and corporate pressure, and destroyed AEW's credibility in the process. He proved that he's not actually interested in building a wrestler-friendly alternative to WWE, he's interested in running a wrestling company that makes him happy and doesn't challenge his decisions. And that's a recipe for failure. Leadership question: has Tony Khan proven himself unfit to run AEW, or is firing Moxley a tough but justifiable decision from a boss managing a difficult situation? Can Tony recover from this, or is his reputation permanently damaged? Now let's discuss the fans and how they're going to react to this, because fan response could determine whether AEW survives this crisis or collapses. The AEW fanbase has always been somewhat cult-like in its defense of the company. Any criticism gets shouted down as being a WWE fanboy or not understanding what AEW is trying to do. But even the most loyal AEW fans are going to struggle to defend firing Jon Moxley. Moxley is AEW to many fans. He's the wrestler who made them believe AEW could work. He's had many of their favorite AEW matches. He's the guy who always delivers, who represents what AEW is supposed to be about: serious wrestling from serious wrestlers who care about their craft. Firing Moxley is like firing the personification of everything those fans loved about AEW in the first place. I expect there's going to be a massive backlash. Social media is going to be on fire with fans expressing outrage. The "Fire Tony Khan" chants are going to start at AEW shows. Ratings are probably going to drop because casual fans who tuned in to see Moxley aren't going to stick around now that he's gone. And most importantly, the goodwill that AEW built up over 5 years is going to evaporate almost overnight. AEW's fanbase has always been its biggest asset: passionate, loyal, willing to defend the company against any criticism. But Tony Khan just tested that loyalty in a way that might break it. You can ask fans to defend bad booking decisions. You can ask them to stick with the company through ratings struggles. But asking them to support firing Jon Moxley for telling the truth? That might be a bridge too far. Fan loyalty question: if you've been an AEW fan who's defended the company through all its problems, is firing Jon Moxley the moment that makes you stop watching? What would it take for AEW to lose your support? Let's talk about what this means for the wrestling business as a whole, because the implications extend beyond just AEW. For 5 years, AEW's existence has been important even for people who don't watch it, because it gave wrestlers an alternative. It meant WWE couldn't treat talent like garbage because those wrestlers could leave and go to AEW. It created competition that forced WWE to improve in some areas. It proved that there was an audience for a different style of wrestling than what WWE offers. But if AEW is imploding, and firing Jon Moxley is a huge sign that the company is in crisis, then wrestling goes back to being a monopoly. WWE becomes the only game in town again. Wrestlers lose their leverage. Fans lose their alternative. Everything goes back to the way it was before 2019, except WWE is now even bigger and more dominant because they successfully outlasted their only real competition. This is bigger than just Jon Moxley or Tony Khan or AEW specifically. This is about whether professional wrestling can have a healthy competitive ecosystem or whether it's going to be WWE's world and everyone else is just trying to survive in it. And right now, it's looking more and more like the latter. AEW had a chance to be something special, to be a legitimate alternative that wrestlers and fans could believe in, and Tony Khan is throwing that away through ego, incompetence, and cowardice. Industry-wide question: if AEW fails completely and WWE returns to being essentially a monopoly, is that good or bad for professional wrestling? Does the business need a strong number 2 company to stay healthy? Let me talk about the statement that AEW released after firing Moxley, because the corporate doublespeak is absolutely infuriating. The official statement says All Elite Wrestling and Jon Moxley have mutually agreed to part ways. We thank Jon for his contributions to AEW and wish him the best in his future endeavors. That's it. That's the entire statement. It's the most generic, meaningless, WWE-style corporate PR response possible. There's nothing about why they parted ways. Nothing about what led to this decision. Nothing acknowledging Moxley's importance to the company or the unusual circumstances of firing your franchise player. Just bland corporate speak that could apply to literally any wrestler being released from any company. It's the kind of statement WWE releases when they fire someone, which is absolutely rich coming from AEW, the company that claimed it would always be more transparent and honest with its fans than WWE. You want to know what an honest statement would look like? Jon Moxley and AEW have different visions for the direction of the company. While we appreciate everything Jon has done as one of our founding stars, we feel it's best for both parties to part ways at this time. We'll address this situation in more detail on Wednesday's Dynamite. That's honest. That's transparent. That acknowledges the significance of what's happening while leaving room to explain the situation to fans who deserve answers. But Tony Khan couldn't even do that. He gave fans the same corporate bullshit that WWE gives, proving once again that AEW has become exactly what it claimed it wouldn't be. Communication question: does Tony Khan owe AEW fans a detailed explanation of why Jon Moxley was fired, or is the generic parted ways statement sufficient? What level of transparency should wrestling companies have with their audiences? Now let's address the elephant in the room that nobody in AEW wants to talk about, the EVP structure and how it's poisoned the company from within. From day one, AEW has had a massive structural problem. The Young Bucks, Kenny Omega, when he was there, and other EVPs had executive authority and were active wrestlers on the roster. That creates inevitable conflicts of interest where they're essentially booking themselves and their friends in top positions while other wrestlers have no say in their own careers. Jon Moxley was one of the few people in AEW with enough status to push back against the EVPs when he thought they were making bad decisions. He could advocate for different creative directions because he had the credibility and Tony Khan's trust, and the EVPs hated that. They saw Moxley as a threat to their control over AEW's creative direction. So when the opportunity arose to get rid of Moxley, when his public comments gave them an excuse, they jumped at it. I would bet money that the Young Bucks specifically lobbied Tony Khan to fire Moxley. I would bet they framed it as, Jon is damaging the company's reputation and making us look bad to the network. I would bet they used this situation as an opportunity to eliminate their biggest internal rival for creative influence. And Tony, who has always been too close to the EVPs and too easily influenced by them, went along with it. This is the fundamental problem with AEW's power structure. You have performers with executive authority who can eliminate their competition under the guise of business decisions. That's not a healthy company structure. That's a recipe for internal politics, backstabbing, and exactly the kind of toxic environment that wrestlers were supposed to be escaping when they left WWE. Power structure question: should active wrestlers ever have executive authority in a wrestling company, or does that create too many conflicts of interest? Is AEW's EVP structure fundamentally broken? Here's what I think happens next, and why this situation is going to get even worse before it gets better. Jon Moxley is not going to stay quiet about this. He's going to do interviews. He's going to explain his side of the story. He's going to detail exactly what happened in that meeting with Tony Khan and what was really going on behind the scenes in AEW. And when he does, it's going to be devastating for AEW's reputation. Moxley has always been honest to a fault. He doesn't sugarcoat. He doesn't play political games. When he left WWE, he did that incredible interview on Chris Jericho's podcast where he detailed exactly why he was miserable and what was broken about WWE's system. That interview changed how people viewed WWE and validated a lot of criticisms that fans had been making for years. Now Moxley is going to do the same thing to AEW, and it's going to be brutal. Tony Khan had to know this was coming. He had to know that firing Moxley would result in Moxley publicly explaining what's broken in AEW and why he got fired for trying to fix it. But Tony did it anyway, which suggests either he's too stupid to anticipate the consequences or he's so desperate to appease Warner Brothers Discovery that he's willing to accept the PR nightmare that's coming. Either way, it's terrible leadership. And when Moxley's interview drops and he details the dysfunction, the corporate cowardice, the EVP politics, the TV network pressure, AEW's reputation is going to be in tatters. The company will be exposed as having all the same problems as WWE plus additional dysfunction from poor leadership and structural issues. And any remaining pretense that AEW is different or better will be completely destroyed. Prediction question: when Jon Moxley inevitably does a tell-all interview about his AEW firing, what do you think he's going to reveal? What's the worst thing he could say about AEW, and do you think he'll say it? Let me talk about the wrestlers who are going to be most affected by Moxley's departure, because there are several people whose careers are going to suffer significantly. First, any younger wrestlers who were working with Moxley or learning from him just lost their most important mentor. Moxley was generous with his time and knowledge, helping develop talent and teaching them the business. Those wrestlers are now on their own without that guidance. Second, anyone who was scheduled to work a program with Moxley just had their plans destroyed. There were almost certainly storylines in development involving Moxley that now have to be scrapped or completely rewritten. Wrestlers who were going to benefit from working with AEW's ace and getting elevated by association are now scrambling for new directions. Third, and this is most important, any wrestler who agreed with Moxley's criticisms of AEW's creative direction is now terrified to speak up. They just watched the company fire its biggest star for being honest about problems. That sends a clear message: keep your mouth shut or you're next. So all those legitimate issues that Moxley raised? They're not going to get fixed because everyone is too scared to acknowledge they exist. The wrestlers who benefit from Moxley's firing are the EVPs and their friends who now have even more control over AEW's creative direction with their biggest internal critic gone. They can book whatever self-indulgent bullshit they want without anyone with real credibility pushing back. And AEW's product is going to suffer for it because there's no longer anyone in a position to say maybe that's not the best idea. Roster impact question: which current AEW wrestlers' careers are going to be most damaged by Jon Moxley's departure? Who needed him most and is now in serious trouble? Here's the absolute bottom line, and I need you to really understand the gravity of this situation. Tony Khan firing Jon Moxley is the moment AEW died. Not literally, the company will continue to run shows, will probably get some kind of TV deal, will keep existing in some form. But the idea of AEW, the promise that it represented, the hope that it gave wrestlers and fans for something better, that died the moment Tony Khan prioritized appeasing TV executives over standing by his franchise player. Jon Moxley was fired for telling the truth. He was fired for caring enough about AEW to speak honestly about its problems instead of just collecting a paycheck and keeping quiet. He was fired because he made Tony Khan and the EVPs uncomfortable by pointing out that the Emperor has no clothes. And most importantly, he was fired because AEW is so desperate for TV money and so weak in its negotiations that it's willing to sacrifice its most important star to show it's taking network concerns seriously. This is a company in crisis. This is a company that has completely lost its way. This is a company that has become exactly what it claimed it wouldn't be: a corporate wrestling entity that prioritizes business relationships over talent, that silences criticism instead of addressing it, that treats wrestlers as disposable instead of as partners in building something special. AEW has become WWE with worse production values and worse business results. And the saddest part? It didn't have to be this way. AEW had everything it needed to succeed: financial backing, talented wrestlers, a hungry fanbase, a clear identity as an alternative. All Tony Khan had to do was listen to people like Jon Moxley who were trying to help, build on what was working instead of constantly changing direction, and have the courage to stand by his principles when corporate interests conflicted with creative integrity. But he failed in all of those areas, and now AEW is circling the drain while Tony pretends everything is fine. So yeah, Jon Moxley was shockingly fired from AEW by Tony Khan. The face of the company was discarded. The most reliable main eventer was eliminated. The voice of honesty was silenced. And AEW's credibility as an alternative to WWE was destroyed. This is a watershed moment in professional wrestling, and not in a good way. This is the moment we'll look back on and say that's when AEW stopped mattering. And if you're not absolutely furious about this, about the waste, about the corporate cowardice, about the betrayal of everything AEW claimed to stand for, then you haven't been paying attention to what just got destroyed.